Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Dana Voglitis, and I am the Assistant Director of the Office of Technology Development, which is part of the Division of Research here at FAU. And my office is responsible for the legal protection and commercialization of research that's developed here at the university. We have an excellent webinar for you today titled Ask the Expert, How Do I Commercialize My Research? And it's meant to be an open discussion about how to commercialize research through different options such as licensing, industry-sponsored research, or starting your own company. And we have an excellent speaker with us today. His name is Rick Swatlowski. He is the Director and Compliance Practice Leader at Tremonti Consulting. Before we get started, I just wanted to bring your attention to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions throughout the presentation that you want to ask Rick or myself, please feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit those questions, and we will try to answer them throughout the presentation or at the very end. And just note that the chat feature has been disabled, so you will not be able to submit questions that way. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce Rick. So hi, Rick. How's it going?
Hey, Dana. As well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I thought we would kick things off today just with a little introduction from you. So could you tell us, for those of you that haven't had the pleasure to interact with you at FAU yet, what is your background and what is your role at Tremonti Consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about the opportunity and the discussion today. So just the 30-second background of myself so that you know where I'm coming from or the lens in which I see things. I'm a chemist by training, did my undergraduate and graduate work at the University of Alabama. I've been in the area of technology transfer for a little over 15 years. Started a company as a graduate student, two of them actually. The first one failed, and the second one I got out of many years back, but it's still in operation today. So I went down that road, published a little bit as a graduate student, co-inventor on 7 US patents, over 50 foreign equivalents. Started my career in tech transfer at the University of Alabama. Basically, there was no office there, so helped create and stand up the office there, and then was the director of that. Left about 3 years ago to relocate to the Atlanta area, and that's when I joined Tremonti Consulting, and have been here, like I said, for about 3 years. At Alabama, I was involved in the management of 600 plus invention disclosures, over 700 patents, and negotiated over 1,000 agreements, license agreement options, NDAs, MTAs, all those sorts of things. So have seen a few of them. And in my role at Tremonti, I help universities with innovation management, basically. So anywhere from doing commercial assessments to marketing to helping do strategic plans for offices. Pretty much my clients are on the eastern part of the US and a few international clients. And as Dana mentioned, I also head up the compliance practice group at Tremonti, which for the most part includes BI-DOL obligations and reporting. So hopefully I didn't put everybody to sleep with my background, but I think that helps set the stage from where I've come from and some of the experiences I've had.
Yes, it definitely does, Rick. Thank you very much for that. All right, to dive into our first topic, commercialization in general. You know, we think of commercialization as this buzzword surrounding technology, intellectual property. We always hear people talking about it, but not everybody really understands what it means to commercialize something. So in your own words, what does it mean to commercialize research, specifically at a university?
Yeah, so if I was to put this as simply as I could, commercialization or technology transfer, they're often used interchangeably, is basically moving something from the lab or the creator's or inventor's mind to the marketplace so that society can benefit from the new knowledge or discoveries. So that's basically how I look at that from a simple standpoint, basically moving something from the institution to the public.
Okay, great. That makes sense. And from a faculty member's perspective, why would they be interested in commercializing something they create in their lab?
Yeah, so I think this is different for different people depending on where they're at in their career or their motivation or what's driving them. Some of the rationale that I've seen over the years is they want to play in this space or to move things, play in the innovation sector to generate industrial or public recognition for their research, basically to highlight what they're doing and potentially bring in additional resources, whether it's sponsored research, students, what have you, to continue the research aspect. Forging new partnerships, and then it's fun to work with folks outside the institution. Some people like working with industry and building those new relationships and partnerships and working on a project and helping to further develop that. Some folks are interested in economic development, so I think commercialization or innovation activities are a strong driver of economic development. So moving things out there, creating jobs faster, cleaner, better, whatever the moniker is that you want to use there. Some look at it from a strictly financial standpoint, so return on investment. So if I can invest X amount of time in this, it could generate Y dollars for me down the road. And then the other thing that I often see is advancing a career or personal reward. So just the sense of being able to come up with a new drug or a new technology that makes people's lives easier or something safer. That's why. So those are some of the main reasons that I've seen over the years that faculty or why they may be interested in commercialization. Those by far are not the only ones, but I think those are some of the more common ones that I've seen.
Yeah, I think you've definitely touched on a lot of beneficial opportunities for both faculty and students. Okay, let's say a FAU faculty member or student is interested in commercializing something that they've created. How would they begin to know if what they've created even has any commercial potential? How can they sort of identify that?
Yeah, so I think there's no one answer for everybody for this. So if somebody's asking you for something or can you do something from industry, I mean that's one clue that there may be some value there. They're remember that industry is driven by shareholders for the most part, so they're looking for a return on investment. So if they're coming to you with a problem or asking if you could solve something, there very well likely may be a commercial potential there. So. And I don't know about you all, but when I was going through undergrad and grad school as a chemist, this whole aspect of commercialization and monetization and making money, all that, none of that was ever really mentioned to me in any of my formal classes. So this is often a new concept for researchers. I'm seeing that it's people are more and more educated about it and know more about it. But in the absence of that, I think reaching out to you, Dana, early on in the process, either with a phone call or a meeting or submitting an invention disclosure, would be a great resource to kind of learn about that. And Dana would be happy to help understand what the commercial potential may be there or what some of the barriers might be for that particular technology.
Absolutely. I think you hit on something worth emphasizing is that, if your research solves a problem that you think a lot of people have, that's definitely a good indicator that innovation has some commercial value. So that's a good starting point. And like Rick said, contact my office and we can help you further evaluate that. I'm going to take a brief moment here to plug one of the other resources at FAU that might help you with determining whether your innovation has commercial potential, and that's the NSF I-Corps program here at FAU. And that's a program that's designed to identify the commercial potential of academic research. They fund conference or seminar attendance for you. They help you get feedback on product market fit, determine if your innovation is really solving a problem that people have, and if the way you're trying to solve it is something that people are interested in. They also facilitate training in customer discovery. You go out and talk to the people that would actually use and benefit from your innovation to get feedback from them. And it helps increase the likelihood of SBIR or STTR funding, which we'll get into a little bit later in the webinar. So if you're interested in the FAU I-Corps program, you can reach them at icorps@fau.edu. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled programming. All right, I see we have a question here from Dr. Blakely. So I'm just going to pause here and read his question. Does FAU send out communications of licensable technology to relevant companies or reach out directly and follow up? If so, what steps do we need to take to move this process along? Or is it up to us to reach out? What has been the most effective path to get licensing of technology? And then he has a second question. All right, so let's address the first one. So it's a combination of both. My office works with Rick and his team to proactively market the technologies that are disclosed to my office. So we put together marketing materials. Usually it's a one-page non-confidential summary. And then Rick prepares a list of companies that we think are ideal targets for licensing. And Rick's team reaches out to them proactively, whether it's in person, phone, email, and tries to get those connections going. And a lot of times the company will express interest, we'll have a follow-up conversation with them, and we'll take the relationship from there. Rick, am I missing anything?
No, I think you're spot on there. I think from a marketing standpoint, I would just add, and Dana said this, I'd echo it, is it's really all about relationships. So the companies are going to come work with people that they're comfortable with. So this is not something that just happens overnight. It's something that has to be cultivated and developed over time. And so I'll just stop with that for now.
Yeah, and so it's definitely not all on the faculty member or student to do all of the marketing themselves. We try to do the majority of that for you. But of course, if you have pre-existing relationships with companies or individuals that you think would be interested in funding your research or licensing it, definitely bring those connections to the table, and we'll help, facilitate it from there. All right, and then he had a second question. How successful have you been with licensing materials that are useful but not patented, such as transgenic mice or genetically modified cell lines that may not be patentable for one reason or another and not in the public domain, but made and housed at FAU? So Rick, I'm going to let you field that one and talk about marketing those type of research tools.
Yeah, so those things are obviously very valuable, and I guess it's a good point you raised. The office and tech transfer is not solely focused on patents or copyrights, but creative works, or however you want to term those sorts of research tools. All of those types of technologies or resources have value and can be licensed like a patent would be through a license agreement. So I think that you'll see, or I have seen, an uptick in those sorts of deals over the past few years, as opposed to the strictly the patent aspects. And I know FAU supports these sorts of things, and we have helped with various projects over the years for research materials. I don't know if I personally haven't done anything with mice with FAU, but Dana could probably speak more to that.
Yeah, I know we're working with Dr. Blakely on several patent applications in this area, but he's absolutely right that not everything in this area needs to be or can be patented. So I think the marketing approach is very similar, but it might be a different customer that's interested in a research tool versus a traditionally patented technology. So, speak with us directly, and we'll try to find out the best approach for marketing when the time comes. All right, back to my question list here. All right, so moving on to the topic of disclosure. I didn't recognize all of the attendees today, so I'm guessing that not all of you are familiar with my office and what we do and how the technology transfer process works. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about disclosing your innovation to my office. That's typically the first step in the technology transfer process. That's how you indicate to the university that you think you've created something that is novel and proprietary and may have commercial value, and you're interested in pursuing that. So you submit what's called an invention disclosure to my office, and you can find it on our website. It's a pretty simple form to fill out, but we're more than happy to help you if you have any questions. So I think I've answered my own question here, is that that's how you typically notify the university that you're interested in commercializing your research. It starts with that invention disclosure form. And it covers topics such as providing a detailed description of your invention. Typically, the more information, the better, to help us evaluate it. We want to know what your sources of funding were. If you used federal funding, that's very important for my office to know. Whether you've publicly disclosed your invention to anybody, that might impact your intellectual property rights. And who was involved in the creation of it? Was it just you? Was it solely faculty members? Were students involved? Were people from other universities involved? There are a lot of different variations on how innovations are created. So we use that form to capture all of that information. So Rick, from your perspective, my office forwards these invention disclosure forms to you to help us evaluate these innovations and determine, if there's commercial potential there that's worth pursuing by FAU. So from your perspective, what information is really important to include in an invention disclosure to accurately assess an innovation's commercial potential?
Yeah, so obviously, as Dana said, the more information you can provide, the better the assessment and the easier that is for us to do. But I think some of the key information would be boiling down what is the invention or what is the novel aspect of this, in 1 to 2 sentences that is not technical. So kind of layman terms, something that somebody 8th, 9th grade level could read and understand. When we do these assessments, we're not really judging the science per se, because the person submitting that is typically the expert in that area. So what we're really trying to get a sense for it is, one, is it protectable? And two, is there a market? And if there is a market, how big is the market? What are the barriers? And those sorts of things. So if you could simplify all the background information and the technical details is fine and good, but if you could simply describe or disclose what the technology or invention is in a couple of sentences in lay terms would be very helpful. The invention disclosure is just one thing that I found in my time in a tech transfer office, was sometimes faculty are intimidated, might not be the right word, but think it's going to take too much time to fill out. And these forms are not meant, it's not meant that you spend a ton of time on these forms. Obviously, the more information you can provide, the better, and quicker the process will go. But don't think that this thing is going to take hours of your time to complete. You can fill out the main points that Dana mentioned, attach a draft manuscript, a presentation, a thesis draft, or something along with that contains more of the details. But one of the things that I used to always try to convey to folks is, don't spend a lot of time putting this together. This is not meant to be a barrier, but it's basically, as Dana said, it's a way into the door, which then allows a lot more services to be available to you, such as doing the assessments and opportunities and being able to talk to Dana or somebody about the commercial potential of that. So kind of rambling there. Hopefully I answered your question, Dana.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had another question come in from Dr. Kudik. He asked how detailed an invention disclosure should be. And I think you basically answered that, is that, you shouldn't go crazy spending a lot of time trying to fill this out, but, try to accurately and succinctly convey what the innovation is, how it works, what are its benefits, why is it better than existing solutions? Try to answer those questions, and that's a good starting point. And obviously, if you have any supplemental information already completed, like Rick described, any publications, posters, diagrams, anything like that, feel free to send it all to us, and we'll consider all of it.
Yeah, and keep in mind that this is an internal document, so it does not need to be perfect. So I find that faculty often don't want to, submit something until everything is all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. So the disclosure form is not meant to be that perfect document. It's simply to start the process of evaluating that and opening the lines of discussion between the faculty or the inventors and the tech transfer office.
Definitely. All right, let's move on to our next topic, which is the assessment step in the tech transfer process. So this is really where Rick and Tremonti come in and assist FAU with determining an innovation's potential, whether it's potential for patenting, licensing, all of those things are considered. And Tremonti has a lot of subcontractors, we'll call them, in different scientific and technical disciplines. So they work with experts in every field. So Rick doesn't have to be an expert in everything, and neither do I, which is a relief. But they have people in whatever discipline you work in, they have experts that can help us evaluate your innovation. So Rick, explain at a very high level for those that haven't gone through the market assessment process before, what exactly is a market assessment and what information is contained in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the market assessment is basically a 5 to 7 page report that we'll provide back to Dana. It's going to have a little bit about the technology, but as I stated earlier, we're not evaluating the technology per se from a scientific standpoint. We'll summarize that in our own words to try and simplify that, but really all these assessments have nothing to do about the quality of the research or the science that's being conducted. What it mainly focuses on is the market opportunity and what does that market look like and what are the forces involved in that. We'll do an initial high-level search of patent literature, basically just trying to make sure that there aren't any obvious red flags, but in these reports, that is not a deep dive like a patent attorney may conduct. So from a commercial standpoint or a market standpoint, what we're looking for is what is the commercial potential? Can we put a dollar value or a probability on the technology of being adopted if it's fully developed? And then what does the size of that market look like? We try to drill down as simply as we can to understand what problem does this technology solve, so we can drill down to the very specific or as specific of market numbers that we can. We'll also try and understand, is the technology an improvement over the current state of the art? Is it a completely different platform? Is it just an incremental improvement? So where is it and where would it fit in that industrial vertical? What are the economic issues? So I've seen many of very elegant, phenomenal technologies. I'll just call them too early for their time. So they're just either extremely expensive to adopt and are not going to move forward from a cost standpoint, or there's other economic issues, regulations or politics or what have you that will create barriers for moving something forward. So we try and look at the economic issues and then lay those out there in the report. We try to get a sense for the cost of commercialization versus the economic benefits. So what is it going to cost if you have a new catalyst for somebody to switch over their process and use yours? And what is the economic benefit to them? So what does it cost to develop and implement this versus how much more money is it going to make them or save them in the long term? So we try and get a sense for what that looks like. And it's not always strictly about dollars, but most of the time it is. So we'll also look at economic benefits versus social benefits. So some things may move forward that don't make economic sense, but there may be some other factors, social benefits or something that is important there. So we'll kind of look at those. And unfortunately, not every disclosure has commercial potential. And so there's a lot of hurdles that one has to get over. So don't be disappointed. And again, I want to reiterate that it has nothing to do and no bearing on the quality of the science. It's strictly the market factors at that time that we're looking at. So that's kind of a high level overview of what all goes into these assessments. Like I said, they're 5 to 7 pages, summarize the technology, describe the market there. And then at the end of the reports, we always have a list of potential partners. These are companies that are in that space or maybe interested in it with specific contacts as well, in case we want to reach out and get more information or see if there's some interest.
Great. And we had another question come in from Craig. He asked, what happens if there are similar patents and what is the path forward from there? So you brought up that Tremonti does a little bit of prior art searching. It's not the main focus of the assessment, but they'll list, a few relevant patents that are similar to the disclosed innovation. So from my perspective, you can do a few different things. If you find prior art, which could be a publication, an issued patent, or a pending patent application that's very similar to your innovation, we try to provide all of that prior art to our outside patent attorneys that we work with in drafting your patent application, so they're aware of it ahead of time. And they'll try to patent around that prior art. So they will draft the claims of the patent application in such a way that it avoids what has been disclosed already in those previous patents or publications. So patent claim drafting is really an art, and you can get very specific with it and detailed in the language that's used. So there are ways to sort of get around what's claimed by the prior art and what you're claiming in your innovation and distinguish yourself from what's already out there. So that's the primary way that we try to overcome that hurdle. Rick, do you have anything else to add on that?
I completely agree with you there.
Okay, great. Jumping back to my last question regarding assessments. I think one of the most valuable sections of the market assessments that Tremonti provides to FAU are the recommended next steps for development, which is usually towards the end of the assessment. And the assessor provides suggestions for what the researchers can do to improve the innovation's attractiveness to a potential research sponsor or licensee. So Rick, what should the researchers do with the feedback that they receive in the assessment? You guys provide us these development steps. How should the researchers try and implement them?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different ways. One, if it's an early project that they're trying to seek funding on, I think those next steps could be useful in going after federal awards. Especially ones that want a commercialization plan or commercialization path. You kind of have the outline for that sketched out. And I think you can also make the determination based on what is suggested there. Is this something that I'll be able to do with internal funds or with the resources that I currently have? Or is this effort going to take outside dollars to move this forward? And then if it's the latter, trying to determine whether or not that's going to be possible to do. And if it's not, then maybe this is not the best technology to kind of move forward with at this time, given the limited resources that institutions have on patent budgets and those sorts of things. So it can help guide research. It can help faculty submit commercialization plans and those sorts of things for federal awards or industrial ones for that matter. And it can help prioritize resources based on the needs and the ability to come up with those resources.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to our next topic, which is the marketing process itself. So again, this is a step in the technology transfer process that Rick and his team at Tremonti are very much involved in, working with my office. So Rick, at a very high level, how are university innovations typically marketed?
Yeah, so I think there's two main ways. You have active and passive. So passive ways of marketing this would be, putting something up on a website and hoping people come to it, or posters or some sort of flyers. That's one way. And then there's various active ways that we like to use to push technologies. So this would be coming up with some marketing collateral. Usually we call, or typically we call those non-confidential summaries. They're about 1 to 2 page max. Just highlights the technology, bullet points for the advantages of it, and why they may be interested. And then the other aspect of that is to list the faculty members and potentially their capabilities in labs. So with these active marketings, you're pushing both the technology as well as the researcher. And the active marketing is basically reaching out, whether that's email, calling, conferences where you're going and interacting with industry or various organizations. All of those are ways that we actively, quote unquote, actively market technologies.
Right. And I think it's also important to emphasize who the audience members is that you're marketing to. It's important for researchers to understand that when we market an innovation, we're not necessarily targeting other researchers at companies or their in-house scientists or anybody like that. A lot of times it's their business professionals, technology scouts that don't necessarily have the same scientific background that you do. There's probably other people at the company that do, and they might loop them in later in the process. But initially, the first person to look at these marketing materials is probably a business person. So that's why Rick emphasizes, describing the innovation in very plain, easy to understand language. And just understand that we don't want to overwhelm the companies with too much information. We know you guys are passionate about your innovations and you want to share every little detail, but at least initially, we just want to get the main points across of what your invention is, how it works, why it's better, and why the company would be interested in it. So that's what we try to stick to with those initial interactions. So Rick, how do you determine what companies to target for a particular innovation?
Yeah, so Tremonti's been in existence for 20 plus years, and prior to that, the partners came from Big Four, so they have a rather large Rolodex of existing relationships. So that's one way that we'll go, just word of mouth and knowing what people are looking for. The second way would be to target companies within a specific sector or market or product, whatever it is, and try and see who's in that space and who all the competitors are, and then drill down in them a little bit more to see if the technology would be of interest or benefit to them. And if it is, we'll identify those. When we're doing marketing campaigns, we like to get 12 to 15 companies, a handful of them large companies. I call it the 80-20 rules, what I try to do. So 20% of your Fortune 500 or 1,000 kind of companies, and then 80% we try to look for your smaller to mid-sized companies. They tend to be the more responsive ones and the quicker to move and agile and can take on these sorts of things. Big companies, nice, they have plenty of dollars, but there's a lot of red tape to get through and things just move a lot slower with them. So we try to focus or make sure we have a good spread of large to medium to small companies there. So that's a high level overview of how we target. And then for specific individuals, that kind of depends on the company and the sector. The titles change across industries. So we do try to target the people that have decision authority from a business standpoint, because researchers then marketing, all that division tends to follow their leader. They have the ability to make something move or not move. So a director of licensing would be a common title. VPR in some companies, depending on the size, or CTO. Director of partnerships, innovation management. Those are some of the titles that you will see commonly with various companies.
Got it. And I think a trend I've been seeing with my office and with a lot of university tech transfer offices is that researchers want to be more involved in the tech transfer process. They're interested to know how it works and want to know how they can assist and help move their innovation forward. So how can researchers assist with marketing their innovations?
Yes, so I have always been of the mindset that this process should be completely transparent, and I have always involved inventors and faculty as much or as little as they want to be involved. But when the faculty want to be involved, it's usually more successful than less involvement from the faculty members. What I like to do with the faculty or inventors to begin with is just pick their brain about existing relationships. They have massive Rolodexes. They've been going to conferences, presenting things, these sorts of things. Have they come across, or do they have any contacts that may be interested in this? And we'll try to lean on them to do that. Staying involved in the process, being prompt to respond when industry is interested. One of the main things I try to convey to folks is that the academic calendar and the business or industry calendars don't line up. They don't work on semesters. So when somebody from industry is interested, if you don't get back to them pretty quickly, they'll forget and move on, and that may be dead. So being prompt is one way that they can help. I know that the time is precious and hard to come by, but in dealing with industry, I think that's one of the biggest things that I try to emphasize is that we have to be prompt. If somebody's interested, we got to strike while the iron's hot.
That makes sense. Okay, so we want to market these innovations, but the faculty member or student's research is new, it's proprietary. They've created something that hopefully no one's ever done before, and it potentially has a lot of value. So if we're going to be sharing this information with outside companies, when is a confidentiality agreement necessary?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I have always advocated that tech transfer activities should never slow down research, publication, or presentation, any of that sort of stuff. But there are certain things that need to be done if you want to move forward. And as Dana mentioned, a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement is one way to facilitate the conversation with anybody outside the institution prior to filing patents or disclosing any information. So if you have somebody that you want to talk to, you have a cool technology, you think you may disclose it, you haven't disclosed it yet, I would urge you to reach out to Dana and let her help you get one of these agreements in place. It shouldn't take that long, a week or 2 weeks. These delays are not on the university side. Most often it's getting agreements back from industry, but I'm certain that she'd be able to work with you and keep this moving forward and not slow anything down other than maybe a week or so as the time it takes to get the agreement in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't emphasize that point enough. If you have any planned public disclosures of your innovation, whether it's a conversation with a company, you're going to publish in an academic journal, you're going to give a presentation, ideally, if you can let my office know first, then we'll be in a better position to assist you with quickly obtaining patent protection or copyright protection if that's necessary, or putting an NDA or some other similar protection in place so your ideas are protected. All right.
If I can just jump in here real quick, I think we may be taking this for granted, but prior public disclosure, just want to clarify that in case somebody doesn't know. So in the United States, or the rest of the world, once you disclose something, whether you publish a paper or give a presentation that provides details to something that you may patent or want to patent down the road, you basically start a clock ticking. So in the US, you have 1 year to file for patent protection from that date of disclosure. In the majority of the rest of the world, as soon as you disclose it, you've lost the ability to seek patent protection. So that's what we mean when we say public disclosure. So anything that you disclose publicly that's not protected yet starts that clock ticking. And it's not, you just need to be aware of that, and we can put things in place or address that beforehand. So it's easier to address it before the disclosure takes place, but it's not the end of the world if it happens outside of the US. It is, but I just wanted to make that point in case somebody doesn't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point to make. And I'll just put another plug in. We have an upcoming webinar in March. That's the second in the Ask the Expert series, where we're going to talk to our outside patent counsel, and they're going to answer all questions related to intellectual property protection. So if you're more interested on that topic, make sure to register for that one in March. All right, moving right along. Our next topic is licensing. So this is the traditional way that technology from a university is transferred to industry. It's through what's called a license agreement. So Rick, at a high level, can you explain what a license agreement is and maybe also touch on the option agreement as well?
Yeah, so license and option agreement basically are two different agreements to transfer rights to a third party. So from the institution to a third party or industry so that they can exploit that in some way. So an option agreement simply, as the name implies, is an option. So it doesn't have all the terms and obligations that a typical license has. So you'll grant them the rights for some set amount of time, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever it is, where they can basically evaluate the technology and see if this is something that will work for them and they want to move forward with a full-blown license agreement. So a full-blown license agreement, you're going to have some sort of grant where you're granting the company the rights to your patent or whatever it may be. That typically includes some sort of territory, so the US, Europe, worldwide, whatever that may be. And in exchange for that grant, you're going to have some sort of something coming back to the institution, typically royalties, milestone payments. Um, Sometimes there's research that's tied to license agreements, and these will also. I won't get into the nitty gritty, but it makes sure that it preserves your right to continue to do research and to publish and present and all those sorts of things.
Great. And okay, we execute a license agreement with a company for a researcher's innovation. Let's talk a little bit about what happens after the license agreement is executed and the company is moving forward with this commercialization process. What does the relationship look like between the researcher and the licensing company? And also, what sort of benefits can a researcher expect to receive from this licensing process?
Yeah, so the company's probably going to want some of the know-how and expert advice of the faculty member in order to, put this in their process, make it work, tweak it, do whatever they need to do. I typically allow that, and you'll see that that is time limited, so that they can't keep coming to you year after year after year to do stuff for basically for free. But there's be that, and then in exchange for that, there'll be royalties that come back to the institution, and then will be distributed per policy, with a portion of that going back to the inventors personally.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think developing these relationships with companies that license FAU innovations, lead to a lot of other benefits that you alluded to earlier in this webinar, which is, internships and jobs for students, consulting opportunities, just increased sponsored research in the future. So those are all good things to think about in terms of the benefits of a license agreement.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The one thing I forgot to mention is you'll have some inside knowledge on what their problems are. So it will kind of keep you ahead of the curve as far as being able to address and solve them before other people even know it's a problem in a way. So future research, as Dana mentioned, either through them or through other options.
Yeah, great point. All right, so let's talk about another alternative to commercializing research, which is sponsored research. And many faculty members are very familiar with traditional federally funded research from NSF, NIH, big federal agencies like that. That's pretty well known at universities, how that process works. So let's talk about some of the differences between traditional federally funded research and industry-sponsored research. How does that differ?
Yeah, so I know that we're getting short on time, so I'll keep this brief. I think the biggest difference between federally funded research and industry-sponsored research are the timelines. Timelines are a little more, you have more leeway with the federally funded research. You can get no-cost extensions, these sorts of things. The industry-sponsored research are not necessarily going to line up with the academic calendar, semesters or quarters, what have you. And those deadlines are often pretty firm. And so if you don't meet those consistently, they're going to move on. So I think the main difference I would say is just the timelines and the commitments and the responsiveness required is much greater from the industrial side.
Absolutely. And I'll just add that FAU has a top-notch Office of Sponsored Programs, and their contracting team is instrumental in moving these industry-sponsored research agreements forward. My office works very closely with them. So if you need any help in that regard, definitely reach out to them or to my office. And I guess the other question I had about industry-sponsored research is what rights does an industry sponsor typically get to innovations that are created under that research project? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a good question and a big point that I didn't mention there. So obviously the federally funded stuff, ownership to those, the institution maintains ownership of those. Industry sponsored stuff is not so cut and dry. So oftentimes if industry is sponsoring research, they're going to insist that they own anything that's done. And so this will have to be a discussion and some negotiation that will have to take place on the institution side on, is this something that we want to do, just give it up, or do we want to try and push back and see if we can find middle ground, or do we want to try and address it if something is invented? So as a general rule, you can think that industry is going to want to try and own everything that is developed from something that they've funded versus the federal government, where the institution would retain rights or ownership of that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that point, our standard industry-sponsored research agreement provides a first option to an exclusive license to any intellectual property that's developed under a research project. So, we strongly prefer to license FAU innovations to industry instead of assign ownership. And that's for a variety of reasons. One is just the value of the intellectual property. Your innovation is very speculative before it's created and even after it's created. These are still very early stage technologies, and we don't want to undervalue what you've created. So a license provides us with opportunities to collect downstream considerations such as royalties based on the company's sales of a product or service that incorporates your innovation. So that's how we can more accurately capture the value of your innovations. And the other primary reason is that a license is typically more in line with a university's mission to commercialize research for the benefit of the public. If we license an innovation to a company, the university still retains ownership of it. And that license contains due diligence milestones, things that the company has to do to show that they are commercializing this research and turning it into a product for the benefit of the public. Whereas with an assignment, you're transferring all ownership rights to the company, and then the university really loses control with what the company can do with that intellectual property. So we really can't enforce it. They can just leave it on a shelf for years and never do anything with it. And that's sort of contrary to the university's mission. So that's why we strongly prefer licensing. All right, our last topic that I know a lot of people are interested in, and I want to make sure we have time to cover, is startup companies. We're seeing this as a trend more and more as well, that faculty and students, rather than licensing to a separate company, are starting their own company around their research and want to be able to use their innovations to further that company and help it grow. So I guess, Rick, why should a researcher consider starting a company based on their innovation? What are the benefits of that?
Yeah, I think a few of the benefits would be control, being able to control what happens, where it goes, the direction of it. You obviously have much more risk involved in being part of the startup, but that greater amount of risk also comes with much higher rewards. So I always say that those that are early in tend to be rewarded the best if something is successful. There's a lot of various reasons to do it, but I think control and just being able to push things forward and wake up every day wanting to move that forward are strong reasons for faculty to get involved with startups.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I guess the researcher's next question would be, okay, I'm interested in forming a company, but realistically, how much time and effort does forming a startup company take, and what's going to be involved in that?
Yeah, so it takes an enormous amount of time and a tremendous amount of effort. I think nowadays there's more resources out there to help people with this than there were just 5, 10 years ago, but it's still an extremely heavy lift.
Definitely. And I guess a researcher can have a lot of different roles within a company. They're not necessarily the CEO. So what is the researcher's typical role in a startup company? What kind of part do they play in the overall makeup of the company?
Yeah, so some of the most successful startup companies that I've seen come out of universities, and keep in mind this is a generalization, but oftentimes the faculty member is CEO, CO, whatever, when this thing is getting formed and started, but very quickly has to transition out of that role or the daily management of a company for conflict of interest issues. The most successful ones I've seen that have the faculty involved, the faculty is some sort of scientific advisor um, on the board, a board of advisors, something like that, but not necessarily involved in the day-to-day management of the companies. And like I said, that's not 100% the case. There are exceptions to that, but the majority of the time, that is the best setup for success that I have seen.
Got it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of flexibility there depending on the researcher's comfort level, whether they want to be involved in the business aspects of the company or if they just want to stick to the science. So I think there's a few different options there, which is good. Now getting to Craig's question, he wants to know what sources of funding are available to help startup companies grow. So I'll start with this question with the FAU specific resources. We have a few. The first one I'll mention is FAU Tech Runway, which is our startup incubator on campus. They help startup companies launch or expand. They facilitate training in business fundamentals. They offer C-suite level mentoring, in some cases provide seed funding, and provide introductions to sources of capital and venture financing. And they also have an annual launch competition. I believe they just opened applications for this year's launch competition. So that's something that's definitely worth looking into. So their email is techrunway@fau.edu if you have questions for them. The second resource I'll mention is the Adams Center for Entrepreneurship, which is part of the College of Business on campus. They host a business plan competition for new ventures. They also facilitate a entrepreneur bootcamp course. They provide mentoring by experienced entrepreneurs in different fields. They offer other resources to aid in the creation of your business and help you implement those. And they present a variety of educational workshops throughout the year. So they're another great resource. And their email is adamcenter@fau.edu. And Tony here just mentioned the Florida SBDC, which is the next resource that I was going to mention. So thanks, Tony. The SBDC, Small Business Development Center, that's affiliated with FAU, is another excellent resource for small businesses. They evaluate business growth strategies, advise on SBIR and STTR grants and technology commercialization. They review business and marketing plans. They conduct certified business valuations and help you obtain access to capital to fund your business. So if you want assistance from the Florida SBDC at FAU, their email is sbdc@fau.edu. Oh, and one more resource I want to make sure to mention before I turn it over to Rick, if he has anything to add, is the FAU Wave competition, which is then a student competition at FAU that funds innovative student projects, introduces them to the lean startup methodology, so helps them learn about creating a company. It strengthens the students' career building skills, facilitates new connections and relationships with experts in different industries. And they'll advise students on internships and other competitions to help them fund their research project. So that's an excellent resource for students at FAU, and their email address is fauwave@fau.edu. So I think I've covered all the main FAU resources. Rick, are there any more general resources that are helpful for startup companies?
Yeah, I think the list you provided there is probably pretty good for somebody trying to get started. The only other thing I say is that there's a lot more resources out there than there used to be. You might Google accelerators or startup groups or angel groups or any of those key terms, and just look for somebody local or in the region at least, or one of those entities that is focused specifically on the technology niche that you're interested in.
Excellent. Well, I can see we're almost out of time. So I'm going to skip to the end and just say thank you to everyone that's attended today. We enjoyed answering your questions. If you have any other questions you want to ask Rick or myself, we've provided you with our contact information there. And we look forward to hearing from you. And we wish you the best of luck in your efforts to commercialize your research. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you. I enjoyed it and appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all today.